am joined now by a man that really needs no introduction here in the Southeast, a man that has won a national championship at the University of Georgia, but also did so much for the game of college football in the SEC and across the landscape. Former head coach, the legendary Vince Dooley. Welcome to the Mitch Davis Show, Coach. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Glad to have the opportunity to visit with you. Always enjoy talking about football, the SEC in particular, and the history of it all, which is all great.
Coach, I want to ask you about, obviously, you've been around the league for so long. When you look back over your career, what are maybe one or two of those memories that really stick out to you in your playing days at Auburn, but then also in your coaching days at Georgia?
Well, I guess the fact that, to the surprise and maybe shock of most Georgia people, when there was a search on for a football coach, that the athletic director, Joe Leaves, who was the basketball coach at Auburn, that I played for and coached with, kind of sucked up his guts and named me as the coach. Well, here were my qualifications. You can see why people would be upset. I was 31 years old. My current job was the freshman coach at Auburn, a rival school. Now, but the beauty of youth is that, I didn't know there was such a terrible bio until that later. When I became athletic director, I certainly wouldn't have hired anybody with that background. But it's interesting how things happen. My goal as a young coach at Auburn, where I was coaching, was to have the opportunity to serve under two coaches that I admired. One was Del Royal in Texas, who was a very fine coach with a great record. And the other was Frank Broyles in Arkansas. And I thought that if I served under the one or the other, that when the time came for Auburn to search for a coach, that they might bring back an alumnus, a football player, and one that had been out, other than just one that was right there in Auburn. But as it happened, Frank Broyles was looking for me to be his backfield coach. And Coach Eves, the athletic director, was trying to decide who the head coach was going to be at Georgia. And he wanted for me, but my background was so bad that he couldn't bring himself to do it. We talked 2 or 3 different times. So anyway, when Frank Broyles called Coach Eves, the athletic director, and wanted to get my phone number, Coach Eves wouldn't give it to him. And that, in turn, triggered him to offer me the job, and which I never would have gotten the job without the call of Frank Broyles looking to hire me as an assistant coach. So that's how things sometimes could happen. It wouldn't happen today in this environment we live in, but it did happen back in 1964 when I came to Georgia.
Coach, that is probably one of the coolest backstories I've never knew about. I want to ask you about a certain recruiting thing or person that you recruited very heavily out of the little town of Georgia, of Wrightsville, Georgia, Herschel Walker. How did that recruitment go down? And talk about your current relationship with the legendary running back and the former Heisman Trophy winner at the University of Georgia.
Well, Herschel was kind of a man among boys in a little town of Wrightsville in the middle of the state. He was blessed with a great body, but he helped to build that body by doing push-ups. They didn't even have a weight program at this high school. He was blessed with great natural speed, but he worked on that, working on starts, and he became a world-class sprinter. And then he combined that strength and that incredible speed with a self-discipline that I never saw in the likes of any other player that I coached. And he still today is probably in as fine a condition as any person for his age. He still would work out twice a day, which he did all of his life growing up. So that combination, and he was playing in the smallest league in Georgia, so he was a man among boys. And everybody in the country had him ranked as a top prospect. And at the end, he was probably the number one prospect in the country, but he was also the last one to sign. And we were fortunate that he made his decision to come to Georgia. I knew he was going to be great, but I didn't know how fast he was going to be great. But I gave him the opportunity to see if he was going to be great in the first game against Tennessee. If he didn't start the game, he wouldn't need the second team. I had two others that were juniors and seniors, and Herschel did all right in practice, but he wasn't sensational. So I had a plan to let each one of them have 2 series, and Herschel had the third 2 series to see where we were. And when Herschel went in, there was no question that he won the job on the field, in front of his players, in front of the coaches, in front of the fans. I said, Herschel might not know where he's going, but he is going somewhere in a hurry. And that's how he won the job. And he started the second half at Georgia and eventually won the Heisman Trophy.
Wow, that's incredible, Coach. And, obviously you paved the way for this latest national championship at the University of Georgia, winning back in 1980, defeating Penn State. But, Coach, I want to ask you about not only your relationship with Kirby Smart, because it seems like you were kind of, when he got hired, you were his, like a mentor and like a father figure to him when he was hired at Georgia. But what did the national championship mean to you and really the Georgia fan base this past season?
Well, it was a long time coming. We had knocked on the door another time. We had an opportunity to win another national championship. We were undefeated, but Penn State, who had lost early to Alabama, and that loss probably helped them. But they beat us in a great game in the Sugar Bowl and won. We could have had another national championship. But we did have 6 SEC championships in addition. And so then it was 41 years since that 80 team that ended up being undefeated and undisputed. And in this day and time, it is hard to go through a season and win them all, even today. As we saw, Georgia, got really whipped by Alabama in the championship game, SEC. But that was a blessing in disguise, because Alabama, by winning and having to beat us again, because it is hard to beat a really good team 2 times in a row. And that is just, there's too many examples of that. So that really helped us to be ready for Alabama the second time.
Coach, I have 2 little follow-up questions. The last one I'm really looking forward to asking you, but I want to ask you just quickly. You coached against some awesome coaches as well. What was the SEC like back in the day compared to how it is nowadays?
Well, it changed over the years. When I came, I was 31 years old, and I turned 32 when we started the season. But the other person that was a youngster like me was Doug Dickey at Tennessee. But all the rest of the coaches were just veterans. You had Bear Bryant, you had Johnny Vaught at Ole Miss, one of the great coaches in the country. And then you had Ray Graves at Florida. And you had Bobby Dodd at Georgia Tech, was one of the great coaches. And so Doug and I were just kind of babies, and we kind of stuck together because we were both young. And the good thing, we didn't play each other, so we didn't have any real feelings except we really liked each other. And particularly in there, listening to Bear Bryant and Johnny Vaught and Bobby Dodd, who actually left the conference after that first year, and all the other veteran coaches that had been around a long time. So it was quite an experience. We had to grow up in a hurry, so to speak.
Coach, last question I have for you, and I've been looking forward to asking you this for a long time, and I've always wanted to ask you, what does the University of Georgia mean to you personally? I mean, obviously, everybody knows the backstories, but what does Georgia mean to you personally?
Well, it is my place. My alma mater is Auburn, and I went there, I played there, and then I went in the Marine Corps for 2 years, came back and was given the opportunity to coach at Auburn, which I did for 8 years. So I had 12 years at Auburn. But as a youngster, to my surprise, to be able to go to Georgia, which had struggled during those periods in the 50s and early 60s, was an opportunity of a lifetime for a young coach. And as I stood there, as I continued to get new contracts and to win, the only 2 schools that I ever considered ever leaving Georgia for was early on Oklahoma, because Bud Wilkinson, who was the long coach that I long admired, recommended me, and I wasn't even going to go take a visit, but I did visit because of him. And then the other was Auburn, and that was after of the 1980, at the end of the season, my alma mater, the governor of the state, was my roommate, Bob James. I had many friends. My wife went to Auburn. She had many friends. And maybe if we had gotten that offer the first 4 or 5 years at Georgia, I would have jumped at Chattahoochee to go back. But I had 20, at the time, 20-something years, and my roots at Georgia were too deep and more recent than they were at Auburn. And all of my children were Georgia graduates. My youngest one, Derek, who went into coaching, I remember when I was going to an interview, he started crying. He said, as youngsters might say, he said, I hate Auburn. Well, Auburn was a rival to all of our children. So I've had 17 or 18 years of football, Georgia football players I've coached. I had a family, 4 children, that all became Georgia. And my roots were more recent and deeper even at Georgia than it was at Auburn. And so I did not take the job. I stayed at Georgia. So Georgia is my place. I have 2 loves. I have Georgia and I have Auburn. Auburn will always be a special spot in my heart as my alma mater.
Wow. Coach, thank you so much for joining the Mitch Davis Show. It was an honor to talk with you.
All right, Mitch. Hope I didn't drag out some of these answers too long, but it stirred a lot of great memories.